So did you hear the news? There's a new Borderlands happening. Now, I might be the very first person to ever talk about this because I don't see anybody anywhere talking about the fact that there's going to be a Borderlands 3. You know, I remember back when Borderlands was kind of a really big deal and a really big risk from a publisher who had a lot to lose. So how about we celebrate 10 years of Borderlands by looking back at where it all began and what steps it took to put legs on guns. I almost said guns on legs. It's been one of those nights. Borderlands doesn't seem like much of anything special anymore. What with looter shooters and co-op FPSs like Destiny, Anthem, The Division, Warframe, Hunt, Showdown, maybe. There's a lot of them now. But back in the early mid-2000s, the thought of trying to jam the gestalts of a traditional role-playing game, that slow grind towards getting stronger, and those of the first-person shooter, quickly clearing out an area and pressing on, just seemed laughable. Hell, games industry analyst Michael Pachter believed that the game was going to end up a failure, since if someone wanted the slow grind of an RPG, they'd play an RPG, and if they wanted a fast-paced shooter, they'd play a fast-paced shooter. Nobody wanted the two together, it seemed. Putting the two together seemed like oil and water. Borderlands was first pitched to Gearbox Software by everyone's favorite magic trick enthusiast Randy Pitchford in 2005, pitched as Halo meets Diablo, with the general direction leaning more towards the FPS than the RPG, keeping what role-playing elements in there light enough that they didn't distract from the shooting. The game's plot at this stage was non-existent. You just shot things, collected their loot, leveled up, and shot more things. To begin even thinking about a direction to take the game, they called the player the Vault Hunter to try and invoke Tomb Raider-esque emotions and drive players to explore the environments, which naturally led the team to work towards developing the game's final narrative. The player is on Pandora to open the vault and harvest its treasure. The vault being Pandora's box. It's really clever. It's really clever, Gearbox. But the game's internal pitch was a success, and the team set off to work on Borderlands with the goal to give a worldwide reveal of the game in August of 2007, an E3 trailer the following year, and shooting for a late 2008 release window. And sure enough, there it is! These scans come courtesy of iXenocider on Reddit. I wasn't about to shell out $6 for a copy of this issue. Do you think I'm made of money? A post-apocalyptic Mad Max-esque shooter with vehicular combat and a gritty, realistic look. Ooh, okay. Well, Borderlands does have that retro B-movie sci-fi aesthetic, but it doesn't have the driving. Oh, shoot. Frick. How the heck do you stand out in a crowd that's all post-apocalyptic and gritty? That was the problem Gearbox had on their hands. By this point, the game was well over half done and needed a hook to not get washed out. Brian Martell, the creative director at the time, took a team of artists and had them work on a visual overhaul in complete secret as a means to pitch a new look for the game inspired by Ben Hyben's Code Hunters. This new comic book-inspired art, featuring hand-drawn textures and an in-engine outlining shader, wowed the developers, though the original game's art director was rightfully disappointed to have her concept art trampled on and models scribbled over, which led her to leave Borderlands. Gearbox? The entire games industry? Oh no, I'm sorry, oh Jesus. But now Gearbox had a new problem. They made this change in the second half of 2008, and the game was still planned to launch during the Christmas season. Gearbox went into a frenzy, ripping up old Unreal code from other games they worked on and implementing shortcuts of all types into the game, with things like the pop-up text in place of actual UI, and Pandora's fixed moon, meaning they didn't need to implement dynamic lighting being used as shortcuts to get the game out in time. And it didn't. Gearbox told 2K that the game wouldn't launch in 2008 and instead wanted a 2009 release date, and they pretty much more or less decided on stapling 365 more days onto the original release date, and it would come out in October of 2009. Meanwhile, fans got to see the new art for themselves in April. And then the game launched. Was it good? Yeah, more or less. Without deep diving into the game, I don't want a whole another Let's Talk About Payday 2 experience. Borderlands 1 offered exactly what they promised. The game had nailed the Diablo gameplay loop intertwined with the FPS action people knew and loved. The visual design, while impressive, was a bit blandly colored for some people's tastes, mine included, and the paper-thin story didn't really hold up under scrutiny. But hey, this was one of the first hand-drawn, fully 3D FPSs ever, and it quickly became one of the most popular FPSs of the year, selling 2 million copies in just a few short months and 3 million just half a year later. Oh, and who could forget the guns? Borderlands' final marketing campaign strongly boasted about its procedural firearms system, and that meant the game had 17.5 million different guns. Now, that's cheating, let's be real. Each manufacturer has 1 or 2 weapons for the handful of the 12 general archetypes of weapons they develop for, and those weapons are augmented with various modifications to alter their stats and name. There's 17 million guns in Borderlands the same way Terraria has over 20,000 weapons. If you count each prefix and each combination of prefixes as a new entity on its own, you'll get that number. Still, the art style pulled people in and the procedural loot kept people going. It was a genius combination. Looking back at Borderlands 1, it's kind of a different beast compared to what was to come. The weapons manufacturers in Borderlands 1 are very similar to each other, and with very small differences in gameplay. For instance, TDR weapons reloaded quicker at the cost of other stats, Jacobs were slower firing but packed more of a punch, Atlas weapons were relatively balanced, SNS munitions were weak but with plenty of reserves, Dahl weapons were more stable, Vladov weapons fired more quickly, Hyperion weapons were more accurate, Torg weapons were all about brutality at the cost of stability, Maliwan had guaranteed elemental effect rates, and Iridian weapons were really the only oddballs here, with infinite ammo that had to gradually charge to stay topped off. These weapons look mostly very similar to each other and share many inner workings. Your Jacob shotgun will work like your Atlas shotgun, which will work like your TDR shotgun, stat variances aside. Likewise, the game, at least the base game and the DLC kind of fixed this, had very little of what's now its trademark sense of humor. It was a very indecisive parody game. There's some crude jokes here and there, but it's not bursting at the seams with memes like its successors. This is a much simpler game through and through with rather easy to learn character classes, and it's still a lot of fun. There really was no place to go, but let's be real. If you can get a copy, please do, especially if it's the Enhanced Game of the Year edition. It fixes many of the more technical issues with the game's original launch on PC in time for its 10th anniversary, including, at last, an FOV slider so I don't get motion sick trying to navigate around places. So Borderlands 1 was, relatively speaking, a ridiculous success. It sold a few million copies and blew everyone's expectations out of the water. The next game had to be bigger, bolder, better in every way. On August 12th, 2011, Borderlands 2 was first revealed, and the next day its new writer was unveiled, Anthony Birch. I don't know how Anthony was picked, so I'll just give you a rundown on where he came from. Anthony, alongside his sister, ran a surrealist video game review series on Destructoid in 2008 that quickly gained traction, and over 100 episodes were produced. Anthony played a foil to his sibling, a straight man who had to deal with her lunacy. The two wrote the series together and were also regulars at Rocket Jump, the indie VFX studio we all know for those gunfight videos that were way popular way back when. And I guess he might have submitted a portfolio of his work to Gearbox, and then they put him to work on Borderlands 2. There was just one stipulation, and it wasn't even really a stipulation. When he was writing the game, he had an idea for a character, and he kind of subconsciously wrote his sister into the game and had her audition, and she got the part. You actually might know her a little more than Anthony, actually, if the name Ashley Birch rings a bell. And if it doesn't, we'll just stick this little image of Miss Pauling in the bottom corner. And also this little image of Chloe Price. Yep, right there. Okay. And those will just be there until it rings a bell. Borderlands 2 also had a new art director, Jeremy Cook, who wanted to emphasize the larger, more expansive world of Pandora. The previous game was rather one-note graphically, and Cook was looking to splash a little more color. Oh, that's the bell! It rang a bell, everybody! Cook was looking to splash more color, and more specifically more contrasting color, into places to make the whole experience feel distinct and new, even if the player would retread locations from the first game like Firestone. Another major goal of Cook's and the art teams was to obfuscate the kit bashing that was so prevalent in the first game as well. Environments are made out of lots of little props, and kit bashing is more or less taking those props and constantly repurposing them. A pile of dirt is a texture away from a pile of trash. Huts and buildings can be reskinned to produce abandoned cities, bustling metropolises, and bandit encampments without much work. And on the whole, it makes the game look kinda samey. They're still reusing props of all kinds in Borderlands 2, but the differences between them are greater, and the end result is a homogeneous visual design without everything conforming to a single look. The new arsenal in Borderlands 2 is honestly a perfect example of the changes made to the series. Each weapons manufacturer is visually more distinct from each other. Compare the now very rustic design of the Jacobs weapons to the slick Asian-inspired look of Maliwan. Torg weapons boast a bold, bright look, TDR firearms are now cheap and flat, and these changes even affect their gameplay. SNS's shtick, their large magazines, has been traded over to the Bandits, who now produce their own jerry-rigged firearms. They're less reliable, which matches the lower stats, but their massive magazines make up for that in some respects. Dahl weapons now offer alternate fire modes, shooting at full auto when fired from the hip and in 3-round bursts when aiming. Vladov's guns shoot faster than ever. Torg firearms now shoot explosive gyrojet rounds that are way slower than regular bullets. Jacob's weapons have all single fire but shoot as fast as you can pull the trigger, unless they're sniper rifles. TDR weapons are literally throwaway guns, exploding into plastic shrapnel when discarded or turning into runaway missiles, and Hyperion makes guns that get more accurate when you shoot them, which would make you think they might have a stake in the ammo industry. Wouldn't be surprising, as Hyperion's now become the evil organization of the day, usurping the Atlas Corporation in Borderlands 2, completely wiping them off the map. It also seems they might have obliterated the Iridian race, as their weaponry and guardians are nowhere to be seen for the most part. Instead, we're dealing with Handsome Jack and his army of power loaders and engineers. Jack is essentially the single largest difference between Borderlands 1 and 2 in so many different ways. Borderlands 1 had Commander Steel, a siren fighting to take the Vault Key for herself and make the Atlas Corporation the most powerful manufacturer in the industry, and the player's interactions with her are sparse. Very, very sparse. She calls in a few threats during the game up until she shuts off the communication system and floods the map with Crimson Lance enemies, but up until that point, she's very much a hands-off antagonist. Jack is constantly harassing players during their trip through Pandora. His face is everywhere. His company is now the richest business in town, and that means the player is constantly getting Hyperion weapons thrown at them. He's omnipresent, but it's not really in a dictatory way. Jack spends the first half of the game yelling at the Vault Hunter, sure, but he's also cracking jokes the whole time. In fact, one of his most well-known lines in the game is an ad-lib, not written into the script in any way.
Hey, how did pretzels suck?
Make no mistake, Damon Clark is the star of the show, and his jokey Silicon Valley tech bro personality is present throughout the entire game. Borderlands 2 places a much stronger emphasis on humor and comedy than Borderlands 1, with much of the game's runtime being used for ridiculous missions like shooting a guy in the face or not looking at an explosion. Jack's completely rewritten history. He forces the first game's protagonist to go into hiding, and since nobody else survived the opening of the vault, he uses this as an opportunity to declare that he's the man who opened it, and with that brought Iridium to Pandora. This new material is a threefer. This is how you get storage deck upgrades instead of spending your cash at Marcus's vending machines. It's used to augment existing weapons into new E-Tech weapons, although you can't do this yourself. And lastly, mining the stuff out of the ground is producing a substance called slag, which acts as a new elemental ability that causes other elementals to do even more damage than before. Think the Inkling's paint in Super Smash Bros. That's the only example I've got. Oops. This game also marks the introduction of the Shift program, a social media campaign to award players golden keys for following them on Facebook or Twitter. These codes would be redeemed in-game for currency you'd spend at golden boxes in Sanctuary. Most codes awarded 3 to 5 keys, and each key awarded a small handful of guaranteed ultra-rare E-Tech or legendary weapons for you to equip. It wasn't pay to win, and hell, most people would just find a stack of codes that were still active online and burn through them for like 100 keys. But it was still an interesting way to merge the social media aspect of Borderlands' marketing campaign into the game itself. This is a massive game with a much more fleshed out story and a whole slew of new gameplay mechanics and plenty of time to balance the whole thing out. The next sentence out of my mouth shouldn't be a surprise. Borderlands 2 is considered one of the best FPSs of all time and is one of Gearbox's highest rated games on Steam. And one of the best FPSs of all time needs DLC. Now let's be clear, Borderlands 1 had DLC. You know, a few of them. Borderlands 2, yeah, there's so many of these things, it's like a baby clothes table at a garage sale up in this bitch. If things sound weird, you can blame my fridge. It's apparently loud as hell and is rumbling the mic. We can throw the picture of those peaks up. Yeah, that's not good. Shouldn't be doing that. Anyways, the first of these new DLCs for Borderlands 2, only a month after launch, was shockingly a brand new character, bringing the playable roster up to 5. Gage is a mechromancer. Not a mech romancer, but a necromancer of a mechromancer. You understand what I'm saying? It makes sense in context. And they'd kind of spark a little bit of a controversy within Borderlands. Not the first one, and definitely not the last. I don't need to tell you, Gage is a cute freaking character. I'm led to believe that she's so adorable 2 artists exploded into rainbow sprinkles while developing her. Can we have a moment of silence for them? Thank you. But designer John Hemingway mentioned, like a buffoon, that this perky little character was me home to the girlfriend skill tree. Essentially a string of skills that would make the game much easier to play. Things like bullets ricocheting into their target should the player miss, or being able to heal by keeping your weapon fully loaded. You know, skills to help out them women who clearly don't play video games. Smooth one, John. That's dumb. Just admit it's easy mode. Besides, nobody used the skill tree really. It's got a lot of useful skills, but Gage's main claim to fame isn't even the fact that you got a giant deadly robot. You've got Anarchy, which decreases your accuracy after each kill but adds an equal amount of damage, which makes Gage a ridiculously capable fighter in the right hands, something truly fearsome even if you're underleveled. I mean, I'll just keep shooting. Eventually one of these bullets will hit you, and when it does, oh boy, it's gonna kill you. We got footage of that in the Anarchy. There we go. This complex, multifaceted kit would continue with the game's second DLC character, Craig. And let's be real, there's traces of it all over the game. Borderlands 2's characters were technically way more complex than the first games by leaps and bounds, and the end result is totally organized chaos in its purest form. If you want a game where the skill trees make sense and are very, very easy to follow, get the first game. If you want to just grab a whole bunch of insane skills and 30 levels later you're like blowing people up just by looking at them, Borderlands 2 is your main man. By March 2015, the game had sold 12 million units, nearly 4 times the sales of the first game. Borderlands 2, in its most technical respects, is a better game, though there are some caveats. The game on the whole is more difficult than the first one, and with more out-there character classes, it can be hard for a new player to find their footing. Additionally, the comedy in this game is a whole lot more subjective. Having Damon Clark yell for his butt stallion, his words not mine, while you're shooting a tiny little bandit stumbling over themselves with their shotgun, having to jump off a tower not looking at the explosion, while doing it literally minutes after the game's tensest, most harrowing quests. Yeah, this is all in the game. There's a mission where you have to shoot a guy in the face, and he keeps yelling at you to shoot him in the face until you shoot him in the face. I'm not kidding, that's all in the game. And you'll either like it, tolerate it, or spend the entire 20-hour campaign tearing your own face off with a pencil sharpener, razor blade, in pure cringe. But everything else, I mean, it's Borderlands, and it's way better than the first one. And would just keep getting better with new DLCs involving a campaign of carnage and a campaign of depression. It makes sense in context. Oh, but one season of DLC wasn't enough for old Borderlands 2, and 5 headhunter missions involving various holidays and cosmetic loot, as well as a new game plus would hit the game. None of this was on the Season Pass or in the Game of the Year edition, much to the chagrin of some fans, but the content would keep getting cheaper after each Steam sale. You can get the character skins for like 10 cents during a sale, and the other like extraneous DLCs, dirt cheap. Borderlands picked up a ton of momentum very quickly, and Gearbox would keep this gravy train rolling. There's one more Borderlands shooter to talk about, but we're not going to talk about that one just yet. We'll say it happened. Instead, we're just going to swoosh right over into Tales from the Borderlands. Context. We need some context. Borderlands 2 is a massive story, but leaves a lot of loose ends. Sad soul of the hour Telltale Games was making a poker title, including Claptrap as an opponent. And when working with Gearbox on the title, inquired about the possibility of working with Borderlands' writers to patch up those loose ends with a story-driven game. Players would still be pointing and clicking, but instead of shooting and looting, they were walking, talking, solving puzzles, and making tough decisions. The 5 episodes on offer of Tales from the Borderlands were released between November 2014 and October 2015. They sold well enough, but the lack of a loot system was a massive turnoff for some fans of Borderlands. I mean, every single ad made a big deal about the number of weapons to acquire, the amount of loot. So, seeing a game where there was no looting felt weird. But at the very least, it turned out this one-trick pony could do more if pushed to do it. I haven't played Tales from the Borderlands, and it's almost impossible to find a copy of Tales from the Borderlands these days. Telltale's gone, and on Steam there is no buy button. You're gonna have to try to hopefully find a secondhand copy of a physical release. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that. But from there, it was kind of radio silence after 2015. There wasn't much happening in the world of the Borderlands for a while. I mean, there were like comics, but I didn't even know the comics existed, and I follow Borderlands on like Facebook and Twitter, so I feel like I should have seen something about those during that time, and I didn't. So I can just assume I don't need to read those then. At long last, in 2019, 4 years after the last game, we got more Borderlands. A lot more. Borderlands 2 and its follow-up that ain't 3 got 4K texture packs that March, and Borderlands 3 got its first trailer around that time. And during the months leading up to E3, all sorts of new surprises were announced, including the first Borderlands 2 DLC in 4 years, Commander Lilith and the Fight for Sanctuary. See, it's funny, Borderlands 2 is the 3rd oldest Borderlands title behind the first game and an RTS-themed mobile title, but it got a whole new DLC merging the plot of the Telltale games into the main series and prepping for Borderlands 3. But what about that inter-between game, that Borderlands the pre-sequel thing? I didn't talk about it earlier. Well, that's the saddest soul of them all, ain't it? On the surface, there's nothing inherently wrong with the game. It's technically set after the events of the second game in the same way that Titanic is set in the 1990s. The characters from the first game are interrogating some of the playable characters from the prequel for information, and the entire game, as a result, is a flashback. You play 4 soon-to-be villains and get to help Handsome Jack go from a lowly code jockey to the CEO of Hyperion. The game introduces some new vehicles for the player to drive around on, as well as the Grinder, a sort of trade-up system to get better weapons from junk based on crafting recipes. There's special time-sensitive buffs you can purchase, and a new oxygen kit. It's like the shields, but they're oxygen-storing breathing apparatuses that can be spent to double jump, ground pound, revive players faster, and travel in air-free environments. And that makes up a lot of the various environments of Elpis, Pandora's moon. If you want an idea as to how well Borderlands the pre-sequel sold, just take a peek at its DLC. 1 story, 1 arena, and 2 characters, and that's it. For everything the game does right, Borderlands 2 already did better. The new cryo element to freeze enemies with is a nice addition, but having to navigate between oxygenated areas and invest in better and better oxygen kits to stay breathing is kind of a pain. The roster of characters is neat, and this marks the first time a player could take control of a claptrap unit. You don't need to breathe, so your oxygen supply is way less prone to compromise, but the downsides manifest themselves in his skills, including VaultHunter.exe, a special ability that literally throws some dice and picks an ability for you to use, often hindering the player or their party. Hell, they don't even want you playing as Claptrap, because if you try to click him, it just keeps popping up with error messages like, oh, did you mean to click him? There must have been a mistake. If you don't want me playing one of your 4 characters, don't add that to your game. You doofus? Spending 10 minutes declaring that your game was going to contain less memes and calling that a trailer didn't do much to draw people in, and the people who did purchase it found out there's just as many memes. And while Borderlands 2 became the home of new Borderlands 3 prep content, the pre-sequel continued to languish. It goes on sale often for like $5, so if nothing else, it might just be worth to pick it up on the cheap for a few hours of cheap thrills. It's nothing special, but it's there. I should stress this was made by their like Australian B team. And that brings us here. Borderlands 3 is right around the corner. It comes out tomorrow as of the day this video goes up. And while the decision to launch on the Epic Store first alongside consoles didn't thrill Steam enthusiasts, my nuclear take is that Steam's early days were mostly filled with stockpiling Source and Gold Source games, and to me it makes sense for Epic Store to sell Unreal 4 games. They do develop the Unreal Engine after all, and it's a pretty handy, hey look what our engine can do to the world and investors. But that's really the only stance I have on that. I'll buy it wherever my friends end up buying it, because I sure as heck probably won't be in a position to purchase it right at launch. But that's really all I've got. The Calypso twins are on a breakneck journey to open the galaxy's vaults, and a new quartet of quirky vault hunters are on their way to stop them, picking up wilder and wilder weaponry and equipment as they go on. Each weapon manufacturer has an alternative fire mode now, many weapons have all sorts of new abilities and attachments, including legs, and the new skill system lets you pick from 3 unique abilities to tear apart the bandits, raiders, and corporations in your way. No matter what, things are looking up for what was once upon a time a risky, doomed-to-fail game from a hit-or-miss developer. And Borderlands has, in one way or another, changed the games industry around us. I say this calls for a celebration. Thank you, Borderlands, for 10 years of reminding us it's okay to be a little weird. Actually, can we stop? Before we go to the end of the video, Borderlands 3 is a mission where you collect poop for a poop enthusiast? That's weird. That's dumb. That's bad. But maybe, I don't know. Borderlands 3, coming to a store near you. Hopefully not the whole game is going to be this weird. Oh my god, that was my fridge. You just got to hear it stop. If you like this video and you'd like to see more, I'd recommend subscribing. Patreon and social media links are in the description.